Hey everyone, it is Kai, and it is the day after the restriction list, or you could say the unrestriction list, as people have been calling it. And yeah, usually the day after these restriction lists, I like to go through a more analytical approach to what might happen to the metagame. The day of the restriction list, I just hang out with Banlist Ken, and we talk about, make reactions, and talk about the initial impressions of the restrictions or unrestrictions. But the day after, I like to talk deeper into what might happen. So, three big things that happened yesterday is that Shiriki, Dorian, and Angerblader got unrestricted in standard to 4, all the way to 4. So immediately, they are going to make some sort of impact on the metagame. Maybe not Dorian. I think the day for Dorian in standard has already passed. But Shiryuki and Angerblader are definite big impacts to the meta. And it just comes down to how far will they go. So let's talk about the meta at the moment. The meta currently is just Gold Paladin is the top tier deck, and a lot of people are expecting Gold Paladin to be hit in the last ban list. Now, that didn't happen. So that means it's easy enough to just say Gold Paladin is still the best deck in the current format. Gurgurt is just amazing. And it basically outseated or outplaced, or whatever you like to call it. It kicked out Vanguard from being the top tier deck. Other deck that is pretty annoying is Kagero, because it just does whatever it wants to do and it won WGP. But so far, the big talk of the town since Divine Lightning Radiance has just been Gurgurt. Now, one thing you want to note, both Gurgurt and Luard, these decks are not turn 3 decks, right? They're not the turn you ride grade 3 you win. No, they're actually second grade 3 decks. So second turn grade 3s. That's one of the reasons why Luard got shafted so quickly, because, you know, Gurgurt is better at doing what Luard does, just better, right? But it's also good at going second, because you have some sort of pressure you can put on. So that's why Luard basically disappeared, because Gurgurt is just a superior Luard. But also, that means that things like Angerblader, Yasue, these are decks that pop off one turn sooner than Gurgurt and Luard. Right, and let's just call it Gurgurt, all right, because Gurgurt is the big thing that, you know, has been dominating all the tournaments. It pops off one turn earlier. Now, Kagero also does the same thing, which is why it's kind of annoying. It just, when it gets grade 3, can just pop off. But yeah, now Angerblader is back. Yasue does the same thing. It can go off grade 3. Problem with Yasue is that it didn't really hit any good numbers. But with Shiryuki, it can make itself hit better numbers. Shiryuki also a good defensive option, but I think defensively, when we talk about the Gurgurt versus Murakuma matchup, then the defensiveness of the Shiryuki is lessened, simply because Gurgurt hits such big power, but it comes in handy against things like, I guess, Luard, because, you know, it's easy just to shut down early attacks. Also, like Gabriel, deck that's been showing itself to be quite decent. Only has 3 attacks, although it gets good guard restrict, anti-sentinel guard restrict. Shiryuki is not a sentinel, so, you know, on the first attack, you can just start shutting down all their columns, and then kind of make it easier to guard. But yeah, so that gives Murakuma that super offensive power, and I don't think I need to say much about Angerblader, right? Angerblader's existence automatically makes it a really ridiculous deck that if given the counterblast, will just go off immediately. Now, let's start with Angerblader first, right? I don't think Angerblader will be as strong as it was before, simply because the meta has changed, power has crept, and everything nowadays can kind of deal with, well, at least all the top decks can deal with Angerblader in some fashion. So if we talk about how to deal with Angerblader, you either bash it really quickly so it loses cards, so it can't really pull off an amazing finisher, turn the moment it rides grade 3, or you can stall it out so you draw enough cards that his finisher turns doesn't matter, and you just beat him over 2 turns. And when we think about decks that could do that before, there weren't a lot. But nowadays, there are a lot of decks that can do that. So Luard can do that. Luard can just sit around, damage knife for ages, until it makes a billion force markers. If Tachikaze tries to build up a super hack or Kanto, it just can't, because these fat force marker cards just slam into it and just feels bad, right? So you can sit around, draw cards until Tachikaze until it wants to give damage to Tachikaze. Tachikaze might be able to put up an attack, and then you just kind of have so many cards in your hand, doesn't matter, and just beat him over 2 turns, because, you know, everything has crit except for the Vanguard. But yeah, that's kind of how it can go. But if you think about other things like Dark Irregulars, kind of do that. Pop off with Number of Terror, draw a billion cards, and then just let Anger Blader do its thing, right? Same thing with Gurgawit. Sit around, draw all their combo pieces, wait until it gets like plus 30k to the front row, and they just pop off and kill them in one turn. And the annoying thing about Anger Blader is that it's like a 12k, and then it hits like 9s, 9k at grade 2, so against Forest Clans is also kind of annoying to fight against. So you have at least one bad matchup against Loire. But then, you know, when Bermuda comes out, maybe even a bad matchup there. So personally, I think Touch Kaze won't really do much against all the top decks, especially against the good players that kind of know how to beat this Anger Blader and how to deal with it. Although Anger Blader did get some, you know, well, Touch Kaze did get support. Some of that support was just kind of junk. It got a grade 3 Searcher. That's probably the best support it got. But otherwise, if you're playing against a strong deck with a strong player, you're probably going to have a bad time. Now, that being said, Anger Blader can easily destroy any deck that can't really one-shot you over 2 turns, which makes it not really a one-shot. But against decks that really have, like, you know, big burst pressure, they don't really exist apart from, like, the top decks, right? So against decks of its, like, own tier, I think it's going to have a great time. This is basically like the Gatekeeper deck, right? Are you fast enough, or can you stall against the Anger Blader? If not, then you kind of suck. You kind of suck. So I think that's going to be where Anger Blader is going to be. Against good players with good decks, it's not really going to do much. But against everything else, it's going to do fine. Now, Shiryuki. So let's talk about decks that can burst on grade 3, and that is Yasuie. With Shiryuki back, it means you can kind of do your plays slightly better. Now, people have been talking about how it's going to be kind of tough to put Shiryuki into the Yasuie engine because there's just not a lot of space. Now, by being able to run 4 copies of Shiryuki means that you can run a lot of the Shiryuki support as well. So that means it solves like some of your grade 2 slot issues where you really had nothing good to run at grade 2 except for the PR that we're never going to get until clan selection. That means we can put in Shiryuki support. Then we can put more Shiryuki support at grade 1. That kind of means we might have like a deck that is much more stable. At the same time, we might not need like things like Nudo, or we can still run like a few copies but don't really give a crap about it as much. Are we ever going to go back to things like Hyuga? I don't think so, because Hyuga doesn't accelerate as much Excel circles as Yasuie does, and that is very important, being able to accelerate Excel circles to keep up with other decks in the format. So I think the Yasuie engine stays, but basically we have to think about reinventing the Murakumo deck in a way that can utilize both like Shiryuki and Yasuie, and then really push the boundaries where we can really pop off at the moment we ride grade 3 and be faster than things like Gurgawit. So those are basically the 2 big things. I think the Shiryuki unrestriction is definitely way more impactful than an Anger Blader one, although like initially you'd be like, Anger Blader, that was that stupid deck, it really sucks, I hate it. But Shiryuki will definitely turn Murakumo into a much more potent engine, and then maybe even push it to be better. Well, I don't think so. I think it'll definitely push Murakumo from like where it is now to maybe even a top tier deck. Now, whether I agree with this approach, I'm gonna say no, right? Because I dislike decks which just pop off the moment you hit grade 3, 0 counterplay, and that is basically the format revolves around just dice rolling again. I think these unrestrictions kind of push that a bit. At the same time, like Anger Blader itself, who cares? But like Shiryuki kind of pushes that. So if Shiryuki's like is very successful, and Murakumo is very successful in what it can do, it pushes more to that format. And instead of like opening the format where if you maybe restricted like a card or 2 in Gold Paladin to push it down to the same level as everyone else, Shiryuki unrestricting like a Murakumo to push it up kind of still makes the format very closed rather than open. Because I know a lot of people, and I do agree that if Gurgawit's power was toned down a little, we do have way more other decks that are like really good, and we have a big open format. But Shiryuki going up kind of doesn't really say that, because yeah, we still have the great Gurgawit deck versus basically everything else. Now, all of this talk might not even matter, because we all know Bermuda is really broken. It has always been broken. And yeah, so Bermuda's basically just coming out in less than 2. Oh, I think it's like 3 weeks. I think so. So in 3 weeks, I think Bermuda is coming out. So all of this could just be moot. They might want to make a. They talk about ban lists and things like that in the. You know, they'll update the ban list a bit more, but when every set gets released, creates a new tier 1 deck, like absolute tier 1 deck, then I don't think that approach is correct. So rather than worry about like these restriction lists, you know, ban stuff, ban things like Gurgwood, or unrestrict things to make them better to compete with Gurgwood, because like, to be honest, like Gurgwood I don't think will change until maybe Bermuda comes out. Maybe just design, like, if they can design better cards, you know, better design their cards, so they just automatically don't invalidate the previous tier 1 deck, right? Because I think Kelvin said it correctly yesterday. Remember how Vanguard was this absolute tier 1 deck that everyone played even after it got restricted because it was clearly the best thing ever, and then new set, new tier 1 deck, the old deck is just not to be seen at all. So yeah, that's basically my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you think Murakumo will be tier 1? Do you think Anger Blader will be better than Murakumo? I think Murakumo will be better than Anger Blader, and Murakumo definitely has a very good chance because just by the kill turn wise, Anger Blader, Yasue, Kagero are there faster than Gurgwood at the kill turn, but unlike a Murakumo, those Kageros and Tachikaze can't really. You don't have the extra pluses and defensive options that the Murakumo deck has. So yeah, that's just my thoughts. See you guys in the next video. Bye.